Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Well, it's 9 o'clock on the dot. I love that. We had a very full 3 days so far, and we're going to have a wonderful morning with you today. In order to begin, we are going to just tell one story that was particularly moving recently. And I'm going to ask Adam to pull that up on the screen. Shaima al-Sabah from Alexandria, Egypt. Her friends wanted to lay a wreath in Tahrir Square as a memorial. But Shaima al-Sabah urged them to reconsider. She feared that the police might attack, mistaking them for supporters of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood, said a cousin, Sami Mohammed. But how, her friends asked, could the police attack civilians who were armed only with flowers? So she kissed her 5-year-old son, Bilal, goodbye, left him in the care of a friend near her home in Alexandria, and a day before the anniversary of the start of the Arab Spring Revolt here, boarded a train for Cairo. By mid-afternoon on January 24th, Miss Sabah, 31, lay dead on a crowded street in downtown, a potent symbol of the lethal force of the Egyptian authorities have deployed to silence the cacophony of protest and dissent unleashed here 4 years ago. Adam.
ما فاتنيش هلحق اركب. انا البنت الممنوعه من حضور حصص الدين المسيحي وقداس الحد، مع اني شاهده على صلب يسوع في محطه مصر في عز الصبح. حتى ساعتها كانت كل الشبابيك مفتوحه والدم بيسابق العربيات على الاسفلت، وعيون البنات تجري للسما وتلحق كرسي الاستاذ من وانا البنت الممنوعه من الحب في البيتين وقفت في نص الشارع، لميت في ايدي كل نجوم السما الخضراء وعرق البياعين، صوت الشحاتين واحباب الله وهم بيلعنوا ابو اللحظه اللي وافق فيها خلق الله على صلب يسوع عريان في الميدان الزحمه، على عقارب ساعه المحطه وهي بتعلن واحده الظهر، وانا البنت الممنوعه من قولة لا عمري ما هيفوتني. الله عليك.
I am the girl banned from attending Christian religious classes and Sunday Mass, although I am a witness to the crucifixion of Jesus. In train station square at the height of the morning, even then, all the windows were open and the blood was racing the cars on the asphalt. The eyes of the girls were running in heaven, catching the forbidden rocking chair. I am the girl banned from Love in the Squares. I stood in the middle of the street and gathered in my hand the stars of the sky individually, and the sweat of the street vendors, the voices of beggars, and the people who love God as they damn this moment that the creatures of God approved. To crucifying Jesus naked in the crowded square on the clock arms as it declared 1 at noon, I, the girl banned from saying no, will never miss the dawn.
So many of you here are courageous heroes working for human rights. Sometimes we lose one. And I just wanted to share that with you this morning and appreciate each of you for the work you're doing and the courage that you have. Later this morning, later in the later program, we're going to have a number of blessings from people who want to offer their words, including our guest, the National Chief Imam of Ghana, who has arrived with us this morning, who I would like to honor. He will later speak in the later session. But now I would like to invite Dr. Reverend Guibord. The Guibord Center had a liturgical event called Saving Grace, a faithful response to violence against women and girls. Every participant was given this scarf, which Reverend Guibord would like to present to President Carter. If you could stand. Every scarf was blessed by one of the women faith leaders. And it says, "I am a beloved child of the holy always."
Mr. President, you are a beloved child of the holy, and we who are here gathered bless you for your continued health and your generosity to all who are here. We bless you and we thank you.
So, there are many ways we can communicate with each other, our messages. And we've experienced music, poetry, stories, and art. And I want to point out to you that we have been enjoying some art all around us all these days. On the banister, you can see these lovely silks that have been hanged by Kira Corser, who's here with us, who is an artist. These silks were painted by Iraqi children who are refugees in the United States, and they have messages of peace and hope. And through this art, there is trauma healing and sharing of the message of peace. And Mark Tuschman, would you stand, is the wonderful photographer who took these photos that are displayed throughout the lobby and the room, and is using his photos through a project called Faces of Courage to both uplift the plight of women but also their resilience. And we thank him for coming, and for Lisa Parsons for paying for his airplane ticket to get him here. But what this demonstrates is a commitment to a message from all of us here and sharing them through different mediums. We can write reports. Sometimes they sit on shelves and collect dust, the big thick ones. Sometimes it's a 3-minute song. Sometimes it's a poem. So later we will be showing you the website that we have designed where we will be committed to sharing these stories. I shouldn't have looked at Marwa. Sharing our work. And we want to make that available to all of you so that we can collaborate. And Susan is going to continue on this theme by showing some further ideas about how we will go forward.
Good morning. 9 a.m., it's always a good idea to wake up. So, Adam, here we go. This is our panel 4, and this is our commitments, renewing commitments, because so many of us are already working in these areas, taking what we have learned here and improving and directing what we are doing. So I wanted to I'm pressing the thing, but it's not advancing. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, back. Here we go. I wanted to, in good seminar form, remind you of some of the categories that were in the summary. But to point out that yesterday, people further complicated these, brought them into tension with each other. Not all religious interpretation, not all religious engagement with leaders all the time can go along the same path. People need to map, be smart, look at the kinds of engagements that work. Also, it was importantly pointed out that there are new definitions of leadership, that women are religious leaders in their communities. We need to broaden our definitions sometimes. Others of us work out of this model already, but that religious interpretation was, yesterday, further problematized. So was power. And the nature of power, Senator Gillibrand did an incredible job of saying, go get it. Go get it. And if your vote gets someone elected, get something for it. Education. Many of you have further problematized the issues of education. Religion and education can be an asset, can be a huge barrier to change. So I wanted to bring up as well and remind you that you further complexified education yesterday. The next one, enforcement, came into vigorous dialogue with corruption, with drug trafficking, with prostitution. And so this one was, again, hugely affirmed by the group, but also the need for contextual analysis of where, when, and how, because we share similar problems, but we do not share the same context. Nationally, regionally, and how we leverage these relationships, very important, but we also need to do our own work in relationship to specific context. And then it's all economics all the time, you know, who benefits? So I thought, because I like to teach using pictures, for the rest of the short introduction I have here, I'm going to show some pictures, and then Karin will call on people to speak, and we are going to talk about, repeat the instructions, Karin.
The instructions.
Actions.
We are going to expect you in very short form, because we want to make space for as many people as possible. Think about what you want to say is the main challenge and what you are going to do about it.
Okay. And I'm going to do this without a lot of commentary. We've talked about popular culture. Dynamic example from India. A Turkish artist paints gender violence, takes famous old European masters and paints over the images with violence against women. The No More National Football League ad that aired during the Super Bowl. Yes, they were shamed and blamed into this. But calls to domestic violence shelters went up 10% after the game. Or the women activists who hacked the NFL ad. I don't know if you know this, but there's an official makeup of the NFL sponsored by CoverGirl, and you can match the colors of your makeup to your favorite team uniform. Well, activists against violence against women hacked these ads and gave them a makeover. And finally, President Obama and his very powerful message at the Grammys. And if you have not listened to this, I strongly encourage you to do so. Violence against women is not okay, and it has to stop, and it is up to all of us. These messages do not fix everything, but as we look at the various points, and I'll finish with something philosophical, power is distributed widely in society. I mean, the powerful would like to think that power is hierarchical, but it is not. It is vastly located in many social locations. That is good news because it gives us many, many pressure points at which to effect change. So let's go now to our speakers. Again, let me underline, we are on topic and we are going to be short so that we have a goal of trying to get everybody to be able to say what they want to say, but in a short period of time. So, Karin.
I just wanted to, before we get started, I want to mention a few of the things, now that the National Chief Imam is here, that were accomplished since the last forum, to give you an idea of what you could be thinking about collaborations going forward. The delegation from Ghana who traveled here, and I'm going to give the first word to the Queen Mother in a second, But the National Chief Imam and his team, Al-Haji Kuzaima, who was with us last time, who just arrived, when they were leaving Ghana, they announced this major initiative on a human rights defenders program to correct the misuse of interpretation, the misuse of scripture to oppress women. And they had a big banner with the photograph of the National Chief Imam and President Carter announcing this initiative. And we are very proud because we hope that we're going to have a forum like this in Accra, Ghana, where we can build on this. This came out of the last forum. President Carter was so inspired last time from all of your testimony, for those that were there, some of you were here, that he wrote a book that got huge coverage. And he was on all the national television programs talking about the issues that we're talking about here with unprecedented reaction. And many, many ripple effects are still happening as a result of that. So I offer that as a way to encourage each of you to briefly say what's important to you and how you would like to contribute. And as I offered before, you're going to send us your ideas so we can keep the conversation going. And first, I'd like to call on the Queen Mother to speak to us this morning.
Good morning. My name is Nakotechu Afraso Manso the First. I'm the Queen of Kotema under the Nikolai Stool of Asne in the Greater Accra region of Ghana. I was the mouthpiece of the Queens in Ghana at the International Women's Summit. I was among the Queens invited for the pilation of the Affirmative Action Bill in Ghana. I do work with West Africa Dispute Resolution Council, WODAF, and Action Aid on early and forced marriage, interstate succession, gender balance, and dispute resolution. I was the only woman on the board of the Interparty Dialogue Committee in Ghana. And I'm also the only woman on the PIAC Committee of Ghana, that is Public Interest of Accountability on Oil and Gas. As a queen, I campaign for girls to be educated to the highest level possible, promote community-level activism against child, early and forced marriage. I advocate to promote social justice for women and girls, that is sanction parents, elderly men, and family members who force girls into early marriage, and advise parents to be friends with their girl child in order for them not to go in for unsafe abortion or fall prey to peer pressure. I have devoted the past few years to the development of women and children, which I have a number of them put in schools and some learning trades and some doing petty trading. I have addressed issues like unsafe abortion, maternal mortality, cruel widowhood rights, female mutilation, child rape, and violence against women. With our Human Rights Defenders Forum inaugurated in Ghana, my current focus is on sexual reproductive health, rights of girl child education, peace among communities, along with other issues related to gender equality. In Ghana, women and girls occupy lower status as a result of social and customary practices. As a result of this, the number of women in parliament is low, but I'm yet to see what I can do about it. So I'm advocating to women in Ghana that they should be brave. Whenever they find themselves in gatherings, they have to be vocal in order for the men to see that they can do it. Thank you.
I think that is the theme for the morning.
Yes.
What can we do about it?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And we are looking forward to working with you on this project. I wanted to call on Richard, who had asked to speak yesterday, and if you can take the microphone there and get us started. Maybe you can stand so we can see you. Or
It's working?
yes, it should be. You want to hold it, though.
Okay.
You should probably hold it.
All right. I wanted to say thank you to Karin and you and your team for including me as a representative for Men Stopping Violence to participate in this incredible gathering. And I wanted to share just a couple of things that we've learned over our 30 years based here in Atlanta around working to end men's violence against women. One is, as Brother Mobim was saying yesterday, as men, we weren't born to be batterers, to be rapists, to be terrorists. We were born as baby boys who, in time, learned to violate women. The redeeming part of that kind of message is that we are capable of learning not to be violent towards women and to treat women with respect and dignity. But we also know that men will stop abusing, violating women when we decide to stop it. And we will decide to stop it when the communities that we live in uniformly and consistently send the message that our violence is unacceptable, intolerable, unthinkable, criminal. And that when a man makes the choice to violate a woman, there will be swift and consistent and meaningful consequences. One of the things about men changing is that I think one of our fears is that if we don't maintain control, that women will suddenly flip it and take us out. And one of our beliefs is that when we begin to fully experience women as powerful women moving through the world freely, it is in our interest. It is our benefit when women can be fully who they want to be. But we can be real agents in making that happen. For us men in this work, one of the things that we've learned is that in order to really know whether what we're doing is working or not working, we need to be consistently bringing women's voices into the room or wherever we are so that we can know whether what we're doing is working or not working for women. So that's sort of just a predisposition for how we do the work. And in that regard, I want to actually commend you, President Carter, for assembling and surrounding yourself with very powerful and wise women, starting with Rosalind, because it's that very structure that gives guidance and direction to you in the center as to how to proceed in ways that really work for women. I have to say, as another man, we wouldn't necessarily know how to do that without that kind of direction and guidance. And finally, I want to say that the structure of this conference kind of represents a model for how men can work as allies with women. When you create a context in which women with real position power and coming from a wide range of social and ethnic locations, and you bring men into that, men who have really dedicated themselves and demonstrated that we are going to work for gender justice, then we can have a structure for real solidarity. So in just thinking about ways that we can work together, those conditions seem really important. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak.
This very powerfully underlines the theme that when there is impunity, there will be continued violence. But you point out that positive modeling connects also to the education theme in relationship to positive models or informal education of how men who are strong behave respectfully toward women. When I was married 40 years ago, my husband gave me a sign that I keep on my desk, and it says, "Men of quality love women of equality."
Wonderful. First, I'm going to call on Mimi and Ruth Messenger, but first I want to call on Penda Mbao from Senegal, who had her flag up all day yesterday, and I kept trying to get her in. So we are so delighted to have Penda and Dior and Benita from Senegal representing what I think is a real model. Susan was talking about models of women in leadership and peacemaking. Penda.
So much, I should probably try to speak in English, but what I want to say, it's better to express myself in French.
So please take your time to use your earpieces,
Yeah, okay.
everyone, so that everybody
so
can understand Penda.
Thank you. Je commencerai tout d'abord.
Just a moment, let everybody get their headsets ready. Okay, I want everyone to understand you fully. Channel 7 for English. Okay. Okay, go ahead, Penda.
Je commencerai tout d'abord par remercier le président Carter pour cette générosité extraordinaire parce qu'à son âge, avec son expérience, s'engager pour la protection des femmes et surtout donner une opportunité, un espace d'expression aux femmes, cela me paraît quand même quelque chose d'assez exceptionnel. Je remercie aussi le Centre Carter de nous avoir donné l'opportunité de cette rencontre, qui est une rencontre assez inédite, parce que mettre ensemble des leaders religieux, des activistes, des universitaires et même des politiques pour définir un avenir et une perspective, cela ne se fait pas tous les jours. On a des espaces différents qui ne se rencontrent pas ou qui se superposent sans dialoguer véritablement. Je dirais simplement qu'on peut tirer plusieurs leçons. Mais l'une des premières leçons, de mon point de vue, vous voulez une action, c'est comment arriver à soutenir, après avoir donné l'information, parce que cette fille qu'on a montrée en Égypte tout à l'heure, ou d'autres, nous sommes venus ici pour avoir cette information. Comment arriver à avoir cette information tous les jours sur ce qui se passe dans le monde en matière de violation des droits de la femme. Je vais vous donner un exemple. Madame Samma Sanir, je l'ai rencontrée à une réunion il y a très très longtemps quand elle venait juste d'arriver en Afghanistan pour se battre pour l'éducation des filles. Et quand quelque chose m'avait frappé dans ce qu'elle disait, je peux mourir du jour au lendemain. Et jusqu'au jour où je vous parle, je n'ai pas arrêté un seul instant de suivre cette dame, ce qu'elle a vécu, et toute sa carrière, je l'ai suivie parce que j'avais un intérêt, j'étais tout le temps angoissée pour elle par rapport à ce qu'elle faisait. Et c'est parce que je l'ai déjà rencontrée et j'avais cette information. Cela me paraît très important. Si nous voulons aussi soutenir les femmes, comment arriver, une fois qu'on est informé, à créer un réseau de pression sur leur propre gouvernement ou sur ceux qui ont le pouvoir et l'autorité dans leur pays, y compris les chefs religieux, pour permettre à ces femmes qui sont en détresse d'être soutenues moralement, mais aussi de leur trouver les moyens sur le plan juridique pour les encadrer et arriver à les sortir là où elles sont. Je sais qu'aux États-Unis, on fait beaucoup d'efforts, beaucoup de femmes, on les fait venir ici, on leur donne les possibilités de continuer à s'exprimer, mais elles sont combien par rapport à ces milliers, voire des millions de femmes qui subissent tous les jours les contraintes au quotidien. Je voudrais pas garder trop la parole, mais pour moi personnellement, qu'est-ce qui a été quelque chose de libérateur ou libératrice? C'est le savoir. Je suis dans un pays où la connaissance religieuse n'est pas d'abord pour les femmes, elle appartient à des familles spécifiques. Et quand j'ai commencé à enseigner à l'université dans les années 80, l'histoire des religions et particulièrement l'histoire de l'islam, j'étais à la fois combattue par les milieux traditionnels, mais aussi mes collègues universitaires qui pensaient que la connaissance en matière de religion n'était pas le fait des femmes. Et même les étudiants posaient des problèmes. Mais c'est par une connaissance approfondie et imparable que je suis arrivée à m'imposer dans l'espace universitaire d'abord, mais aussi dans l'espace public. Et je l'ai accompagnée, à l'époque, les femmes ne prenaient pas beaucoup la parole. Et je crois que la prise de la parole est la première forme de conquête de pouvoir chez les femmes. Si on ne prend pas la parole dans l'espace public pour nous exprimer, il nous sera extrêmement difficile d'être acceptés en tant que tels. Pour subvertir le rapport de force, nous avons besoin de prendre une parole, mais une parole argumentée, une parole documentée, une parole basée et fondée sur la connaissance. J'ai continué à me battre, j'ai même eu des moments, ce qu'on appelle des procès contre les islamistes, j'étais menacée de mort et tout, mais cela ne m'a pas empêché de continuer à faire mon travail. Et je crois que j'ai contribué par mon action au quotidien à changer un tant soit peu le rapport de force entre les hommes et les femmes, entre les religieux et les non-religieux, et je continue à me battre, et ça c'est essentiel pour l'État laïque, la République, parce que c'est là où on pourra aussi atteindre la citoyenneté en tant que femme, une citoyenneté entière et capacitaire. Donc encore une fois, je vous remercie, mais nous devons en tout cas continuer à partir du website, d'avoir toutes les informations nécessaires et de créer des opportunités pour soutenir en tout cas celles qui sont en détresse et d'être au courant de ce qui se passe autour de chacun et chacune d'entre nous pour arriver véritablement à avancer dans ce domaine. Encore une fois, je vous remercie.
Perfect, Penda. I'm now going to turn to Mimi Haddad, who had something special she wanted to share. Please introduce yourself, Mimi.
Yes, hello. Thank you. My name is Mimi Haddad, and I work with Christians for Biblical Equality. It's an honor to be in this room with so many distinguished leaders. Karin, thank you all. President Carter, it's an exceptional privilege to thank you personally for your leadership and your sacrifice to our world. From where I sit, your moral courage and spiritual leadership is making a significant difference, raising awareness and convincing Christians that their patriarchal reading of Scripture only fuels the devaluation, marginalization, and abuse of girls globally. I work with evangelical theologians, among whom only 7% are female. They do not see the link between a hierarchical reading of select passages and the daily consequences that imposes on females around the world. And as you've said so wisely in your book that I do believe is significant and making an impact, you write, quote, prejudice, discrimination, war, violence, distorted interpretations of religious texts, physical and mental abuse, poverty and disease fall disproportionately on girls and women. These words, President Carter, penetrate the hearts of those who admire your love of Scripture and your devotion to Christ, your consistent living this out in service to people created in God's image. And in my view, your work and writings are a prophetic challenge precisely because you make your case within an ethos these people share. It's bearing fruit, and I thank you for every word you have written and every life you have improved. Thank you.
Mimi said she's shy, but I told her she had. When she told me that yesterday, I said she must share it. And I'll now call on Ruth Messenger, who has a very specific proposal for us.
I do indeed. I want to start with huge thanks and respect for President Carter, for Mrs. Carter, and for all of the people at this center, including all of the people who've come for the last 4 days. And Mr. President, in honor of your book, I'm going to start, I promise to be very brief, with an excerpt from the Babylonian Talmud in which the rabbis sit to argue which is more important, study or action. Rabbi Tarfon says study is more important. Rabbi Akiva says action is more important. And so the rabbis debate and they come to the conclusion that study is greater because it leads to action. And that is what we do at American Jewish World Service, taking action in support of human rights of marginalized populations in 19 countries, many of them concerned with gender-based violence, with the empowerment of girls and women, with rape as a weapon of war, and most particularly with the focus on the issue of forced early marriage in India. But also, and here's where every one of you comes in, we work in the United States. We work looking for changes in United States law, policy, budget, or practice that would change the lives of people around the world. There's a particular issue at hand, and again, I'm speaking both to those from the states who are citizens here and everyone else. We are looking for passage by the United States Congress of the I'm sorry, I have to speak slower. It's a real challenge. We are looking for, in a particular case, we're looking for passage by the United States Congress of the International Violence Against Women Act. It seems odd that this has failed to pass 4 times, but it's now up again, about to be introduced. What this act would do is declare gender-based violence to be a critical global issue for all work of development, economic, security, and other issues by our government, and use this act as a mechanism for Congress to proceed in a way that supports aid effectiveness, that streamlines and coordinates everything our government does in interaction with other countries, many of them your countries, on the issues of gender-based violence. So, how can each of you help? Every single person here who is a United States citizen, we will implore you to be in touch with your representatives, and to put your organizations in line with the Coalition to End Violence Against Women and Girls, and obviously you can reach me through Karin. But what about the rest of you? I want to say, I hope the President will back me up, that many of our members of Congress do not hear nearly often enough from the people who are directly impacted by the policies that they create. And so documents and information, such as Susan's summary from the working groups here, but such as individual notes that any of you might write about the situation in your countries, we can collect and bring to the members of Congress for them to understand what we hear from our grassroots partners on the ground all the time, which is that if the United States would pass an act against international violence, it would enable them to be better advocates in their own countries to stop such violence. Mr. President, I have a very specific request. We have a letter to you asking if you would consider being in touch with one of the leading, hopeful future co-sponsors of this act, and that is Senator Isaacson from Georgia. So I will give you this letter, and I hope you'll be able to at least put in a call to him. And I want to end there, but I want to say that of the many, many, many great lines that we heard yesterday, one of my favorite ones was that patience is overrated, that we need all to think big. It is about to be the Jewish holiday of Purim. Many of you know the story of Esther. Esther was told by her uncle, "You cannot refuse the challenge that I am giving you, because that might just be what you were put on this earth to do." I say that to all of us as we keep on with the struggle. Thank you.
An extremely good model of being very, very specific for, as the text said, such a time as this.
So I'm going to now call on Dr. Sadiq from Tunisia, who has joined us. We have a very substantial delegation from Tunisia, and we're appreciative of these human rights leaders who are facing a lot of the issues that we're discussing here and have some words of wisdom for us. If you can use your headsets, he'll speak in French.
Merci, Madame. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je suis très honoré de m'adresser directement à cette Assemblée, à vous-même, et honoré, mais quelque peu intimidé. Parce que dans ma jeunesse active, je me rappelle de cet homme, président des États-Unis, qui a eu cette longue vue dans un univers particulièrement difficile, la montée de l'intégrisme à l'époque, la révolution iranienne, de Khomeini, etc., et qui ne vous a pas empêché d'être aussi profondément dans l'horizon lointain, malgré les calculs qui auraient pu vous amener à un deuxième mandat. Vous avez sacrifié, je pense, un deuxième mandat pour être toujours présent des dizaines d'années plus tard. C'est pour ça que devant votre stature, je suis un peu intimidé. J'ai attendu ce moment-là pour m'adresser à cette assemblée, parce que quand on m'a invité, alors que je ne suis pas du tout connu sur les carnets de cette assemblée du Carter Center, je me suis dit, je dois être utile. Et j'ai entendu très attentivement ce qui s'est passé et ce qui a été dit à propos de l'oppression de la femme, à propos des violences, à propos du terrorisme. Et je dois vous communiquer 2 points. S'il vous plaît, je sais que vous êtes attentifs à tout ce qui est exposé à votre écoute. Le premier point, c'est que dans cet islam qui pose des problèmes aujourd'hui à l'histoire et à la planète, il n'y a pas d'église. Il y a même un adage, un proverbe, une règle dans l'islam qui dit « point de clergé en islam ». La rahbaniyata fil islam. Alors, aidez-nous, nous sommes des gens qui ont pris au mot cette absence de clergé, cette absence de leadership religieux dans l'islam. Puisque c'est la dernière religion, elle veut être surtout soumise à la raison. Je vous rappelle du temps où il y avait en Espagne les 3 religions prospères, avec Maïmonide pour le judaïsme, avec Alphonse XIII pour le christianisme, avec Averroès pour l'islam, il y avait même les églises, les synagogues et les mosquées qui étaient contiguës dans l'urbanisme de la ville de Séville ou de la ville de Cordoue. Donc, il faut tenir en compte, à mon avis, le centre Carter doit tenir en compte le fait que nous sommes de l'Indonésie jusqu'au Ghana et jusqu'au Sénégal, comme a parlé une de mes collègues ici présente, il n'y a pas longtemps. Nous sommes tout seuls à pouvoir aider cet islam-là à entrer dans la rationalité, dans une lecture nouvelle qui ne sera pas une lecture ecclésiastique commandée par une papauté ou par un leadership qui est toujours allié au pouvoir, toujours. Ce que je recommande à votre écoute et au centre Carter, c'est que pour promouvoir la paix, aider ces personnalités-là, surtout des femmes aujourd'hui, comme ma collègue la sénégalaise a parlé, et comme ma voisine tunisienne, Madame Amel Grami, ne cesse de lutter depuis toujours, depuis des dizaines d'années, ne cesse de lutter pour dire que la femme aussi a son mot à dire pour lire le Coran, pour imposer une certaine lecture qui sera en phase avec la paix, avec la non-violence, avec la promotion de cette moitié de l'humanité qu'on appelle les femmes. Cela, il faut l'inscrire. Le leadership islamique, on le respecte. À Al-Azhar en Égypte, ou à la Zitouna en Tunisie, en Indonésie, au Ghana, on le respecte. Mais on doit lui dire que ce qu'il conçoit, c'est une opinion comme une autre, et qu'il n'y a pas de sainteté, il n'y a pas de papauté en islam, il n'y a pas d'autorité qui vient de Dieu. J'ai communiqué un petit texte au centre Carter, je ne sais pas s'il a été inséré sur vos toiles, qui raconte une petite anecdote qui s'est passée au XIVe siècle. Je suis certain, Monsieur le Président, que vous connaissez cet homme sanguinaire qui s'appelle Timur-Lenk. Celui qui investissait des villes, les incendiait, Damas ou Samarcande, et les investissait, et puis on sortait en construisant des pyramides de crânes, de 90 000 crânes, 80 000 crânes, en signant son triomphe, sa victoire, entre guillemets. Alors, il était à Damas, et le pouvoir d'Égypte, qui commandait la Syrie à l'époque, lui a envoyé Ibn Khaldoun, un des plus grands intellectuels de l'époque, le fondateur de l'histoire de la sociologie. Il lui a envoyé cet homme-là et il a discuté avec lui. Et Timur-Lenk a dit à la fin qu'il allait incendier Damas, il allait massacrer la population, parce que ce qu'il venait d'entendre sur le Coran était une parole divine, d'accord, mais l'oreille est humaine. Et que l'oreille de cet homme-là est l'oreille d'un sanguinaire et qui ne peut pas du tout être persuadé par ce que lui a dit Ibn Khaldoun. Le deuxième point sur lequel j'insiste et j'en termine, c'est que maintenant que vous n'avez plus ce calcul de l'urgence, que vous êtes en train de regarder très loin pour l'avenir le plus lointain de l'humanité. Vous n'êtes pas cet homme qui calcule avec des pays musulmans qui sont en train de mettre à bas les droits de l'homme. Il faut que vous nous aidiez à dire que dans certains pays pétroliers, qu'un président en exercice peut ménager, peut être diplomatiquement avec eux, mais vous, le Centre Carter, doit nous aider à les dénoncer. Ce sont des gens qui oppriment la femme, qui exercent la lapidation, qui exercent la flagellation publique, qui exercent l'amputation de la main, et que, parce qu'ils sont des alliés utilitaires des États-Unis, personne n'en parle et personne ne dénonce ce qu'elles font contre la femme et contre les droits de l'homme. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, de m'avoir donné la parole.
Thank you, Dr. Sadiq. We appreciate your contribution here today very much. And I'm going to call on Ala Murabit from Libya.
Assalamu alaikum. Kind of carrying on from that, I wanted actually to make mention of the role of the international community in conflict and post-conflict countries. I think the discussions over the past few days have made it clear that women's rights and the actualization of women's rights and human rights in a lot of our countries can't happen in a vacuum. It needs women, it needs men, it needs international community, it needs the local community, it needs security structures, policy, enforcement. It needs this whole kind of holistic approach. And the international community plays a very significant role, particularly in conflict and post-conflict countries. Their influence is seen especially on, first off, policy, and then, of course, the enforcement of that and the prioritization of that. So the way to give you a bit of background, I founded an organization in Libya in 2011. And actually, the bulk of our organization's work began during the Libyan Revolution. Very early on into the organization, I had a lot of access to the international community. And the reason I had that was, despite the fact that I lived in a rural community, the international community would not leave the capital. So I went to the capital. I stayed in the capital. I would interfere in their lunches and sit down next to the UN SRSG and say, well, we're going to talk now since we're both here. And eventually started getting meetings that way. And the international community, in my opinion, has kind of a triangular approach of working with local communities. First, you need access more than anything. Access is extremely important. But second, there's information or expertise, right? And lastly, there's a resource exchange. So that could be technical support, that could be financial support, that could be material, etc. Now, I think we've all had extensive discussions as to where the international community has lacked. Unfortunately, it is not necessarily very cohesive. There is a lack of coordination. As Dr. Sadiq said, there is a sense of hypocrisy. They will tell you not to have dialogue with religious leaders or militias, and then they themselves will go meet with religious leaders and militias and exclude women altogether. So that, I think, everybody understands exists. I have a few asks of the Carter Center. And I understand that everybody has been asking, but I know that given your influence in this particular sphere, I'm hoping that we can come out with something. First and foremost, I think there was a healthy discussion in our group about how there needs to be more pressure on the international community from those influential within it to have a more coordinated and cohesive approach. And that means in conflict and post-conflict countries, it should not just be a free-for-all. We should not have 6 gender advisors from different departments coming in and asking to speak to rape victims and to get names of rape victims and pictures of them and videos of them. There needs to be more empathy and understanding of the local context. And I think a lot of that can exist with a more coordinated, educated, and cohesive approach. And I think that pressure from institutions like the Carter Center would be very, very helpful. Secondly, and this is something that I think the Carter Center excels in, is convening meetings like this, but convening them also for the international community who work in our environments. So it is great to have activists here, but we are, and members of the international community, but I think very focused meetings and forums and conferences and workshops for members of the international community that go into these countries, to sensitize them to the local situation, to make it clear how exactly they might need to be, they need to work with, I guess, the local community, and that it's very important that they listen to the local community. I think that given the experience you have from activists, that could transfer very well into, you know, being relayed to the international workers who do come into our countries and work there. So those would be my recommendations. Thank you.
You remind me so much, Malia, of a film in Chicago on gang violence. It's called The Interrupters. And that is one thing that you're sitting down at lunch with people and just interrupting business as usual is a change strategy, because we interrupt. Power wants to go on its merry way, and we can be interrupters of that. And I celebrate that in you.
I take being called a gang member a huge compliment in this case.
No. These are people who stop the gangs.
Oh, okay.
They interrupt gang activity. Let's be clear.
We like it.
It's a strategy of nonviolence.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
All right.
I'd like to call on Jessica Neuwirth.
Thank you. I also have a concrete request for President Carter and the Carter Center that I think follows on what was just said, also relating to the international community and some of the discussion we had yesterday on Resolution 1325. And it's study and action. I think that's actually a false dichotomy, because study without action doesn't take us anywhere, and I think action without study has the same problem. So we've been looking at 1325 for 15 years, and we all agree that it hasn't been implemented, and I think we do need to study why is that the case. And I think it was pointed out yesterday that the part that's moved forward more is what was called, I'm not sure I like this term, the victimization agenda. It's really the sexual violence agenda. And that has moved forward much more quickly, and maybe a little bit more effectively. But I think that it's another false dichotomy to say victimization versus participation, because the terror of sexual violence really inhibits political participation. So I think we have to keep those concepts together, and they should move forward together. And it's unfortunate that they've been somewhat divided in the UN follow-up, but in 1325 they are there together. And the way I see the implementation working, every year there's a celebration of the anniversary of 1325 in October, because that's when it was passed. And women come together and they bring people from conflict zones to come and talk in an ARIA formula to the Security Council. And I find that very superficial. I think it's usually not timely. It's just once a year. I don't know any other Security Council resolution that celebrates an anniversary. And that ritual becomes, I think, a substitute for real implementation. It would make more sense and be more organic, I think, if any time a country went onto the Security Council agenda, there was an automatic convening of women by the Security Council. I think our method is mainly the interrupter method that was just described. And that's the wrong method for 1325, because the responsibility should be on the Security Council, and they should be convening these meetings the minute conflict erupts. You know, right now in Ukraine, we see all of this on the news every day. We don't hear anything about what the UN is doing to implement 1325 in that context. And recently, I've also been watching closely the efforts around Syria, and again, it's, you know, banging on the door which doesn't easily open. And a question came up yesterday about who are the women? Which women? And I do think that is a little bit important. I think there are different types of women and different types of roles, and that there's actually sometimes an important distinction between women who are in the diaspora and women who are in the country affected. I know when I brought some Syrian women to meet with members of Congress last year, the members of Congress were very pleased to hear from women inside the country who said, please do not proceed with bombing, because they were getting a different message from the American Syrian constituency, including women. And I think that people inside the country had maybe a little bit of a different perspective. But at the same time, trying to get those women into the discussions on peace was difficult, not only because of general resistance, but because in structural terms, you know, there was an effort to bring parties to the conflict together, and even the State Department was pressuring women, well, could you be part of the coalition delegation? And they felt the coalition didn't really have legitimacy. They didn't want to be part of the coalition delegation. They didn't want to be part of the Assad delegation. So they didn't really have a space in the process. And I think that the women we most want in the process are the women who have the most political neutrality, the women who are really the peace activists, not, you know, and I think sometimes delegations are pressured to bring women who become like a window dressing. And what we need is to create a space for a third presence or an additional presence that's really women who are there as women to represent civil society, not one of the parties, and who can either be politically neutral or politically balanced, but can operate in a way that gives them a structure that we don't have. So that would be my request, is if that would be something, because President Carter has so much experience in mediation and conflict resolution, that the Carter Center might take the lead on, because I think there's a need for some development of thinking in that area. Thank you.
So that's very specific. A set-aside automatic, you know, in the Sun City peace process for the Congo, there was a civil society table. There was that commitment. And I like this idea of a special commitment to a process of identifying grassroots peace activist women for anytime a situation comes in front of the Security Council. It's linked to 1325. It's very specific. Ambassador.
Jessica, would you send me an email with a description of the delegation you took to the U.S. Congress? Thank you.
Here. Okay, I have next Christy Vines on my list.
Thank you. Very different from many of you here. I come to this work not from a human rights background or even a gender background. Really the lens and kind of my academic background really puts me in a position to see much of this work through a national security framework and lens. And so oftentimes when I'm in these conversations, and I'm in many of them, I kind of beat the same drum, and I want to express that today because I do think it's very important, but I also want to say that this is really within a U.S. framework because I know this looks very different in other contexts and in other countries. But we talk so often about this industrial military complex, and we talk about it as if it's kind of an amoeba or an institution that is faceless, but certainly has tremendous power, both for good, but especially for ill. But I've had the privilege of working within kind of this national security environment, especially with our military, and at you know, some of the highest levels. And I think what has really spoken to me as somebody who believes deeply in all of this work and sees the harm that our national security policy, our foreign policy, but especially kind of our military engagement has around the world is that our military is made up of individuals. And what they have often said to me as I've worked both with the chaplaincy within the Joint Chiefs Office, but also to advisors within the Joint Chiefs Office, is that they're individuals who understand that if they get it wrong, not only are their own lives on the line, but certainly people die. And it's not their mandate, it's not what they intend, but they also don't have the decision, they also don't make the decision to go to war. They make the decision how to actually enact that war. And I think there's incredible opportunity, and I think they, in my conversations at least, they have asked for this, is a different way of thinking. Certainly they do not get courses on women's rights. They don't think about in our military colleges, how do I think about human rights in the work that I do? How do I know who to work with, who not to work with? And where, you know, religious leader engagement is only looked through a very formal lens, where often it is only men at the table when they are in these environments. And so they are craving these kinds of conversations, this kind of information. And so I put out there specifically as both recommendation, but also as my own commitment. I am very much committed, at least in as much as I can, to continue to advocate for their inclusion in these conversations, for them to be open to including coursework in our military colleges, in our training of officers, I've been fortunate to have relationships with current and former presidents of many of our military colleges, and they too are looking for a different approach. And I know sometimes it's hard to see that, but when they are engaged in a war, they often say our resources are completely tied. We need to be engaged on this before we're in the war, before we have boots on the ground. And so I am committed to this work. I certainly hope that if there's anyone who has recommendations, I'm always happy to carry them into these conversations. But I would love, certainly, to see organizations and institutions like the Carter Center and others who understand those dynamics within the interagency, but also in terms of our foreign policy, really reach out to those actors, and I'm certainly willing to help in any way that I can.
Christy, for your information, that recommendation that especially the war colleges, the graduate institutions of the military services, include curricula related to women and peace building. That is actually one of the recommendations in the United States National Action Plan for the implementation of 1325, which, as you know, was promulgated in December of 11. That recommendation is embedded in the DoD plan because it's one of the 17 agencies with responsibility to implement the national plan. However, not much has been done. Since there is a specific recommendation, it is something that you can work on. You can basically write a letter to the commandants and say, well, here's something you could do.
I heard that. Nobody else heard that.
By the way, the Naval War College is a little bit ahead on this.
Yeah. Maybe because its head was in charge. So he just said, we can work on this. So nobody else heard that. I wanted you to hear that. I'm going to go ahead to Catherine Marshall, but and I also wanted to get a couple of other people warned that I'm going to call on you soon. I'm going to call on Angel in a few minutes, so you can be prepared. And Marwa and Dahlia, she left. Okay, let's start with Catherine Marshall.
Susan Hayward and I are coming out with a book that's very pertinent to the topic that we're talking about here on women, religion, and peace. And I drew out the top 10 recommendations in reverse order of importance. So this Susan hasn't seen this, but this is at least an effort to try to be very, very quick. The first is that there's a Bermuda Triangle, which is a space where all disappears in scholarship and practice, where women, religion, and work for peace are linked. So the project in the book represents a deliberate effort to enter this territory and bridge the divides that explain the invisibility. Number 9, the discussions were complicated by very different definitions of peace. Women involved in many facets of relevant and creative work tended to see peace much more broadly than conventional peace-building frames of reference. And they often excluded themselves as peacemakers because of this focus. So broader definitions are indeed appropriate as they make the links with the root causes around poverty, injustice, and culture that we've been focusing on here. 8, this invisibility matters a lot. It affects the kinds of peace that are discussed and negotiated, who benefits, and how peace accords and programs are implemented. So the broader conception sees peace built on the best of religious and cultural traditions and demanding norms of equity and justice. 7, harsh stereotypes are all too common. They essentialize religion as a thoroughgoing problem for gender and feminism, especially Western feminism, as opposed to religious values and institutions. Such stereotyping is wrong-headed and damaging. Number 6, religious conservative discourse and various patriarchal tendencies are linked to subordination of women, and this needs to be recognized. Our view is clearly that such religious paradigms need to change. A key priority is engaging and listening to women's religious voices and acknowledging their leadership in its many forms. 5, some cultural obstacles to women's engagement have some distinctive features where religion is involved, and these include women's silence in meetings and tendency to accept ordained clergy as gatekeepers. 4, strategic invisibility can be important and can be an asset. For example, women outside formal structures may have more flexibility and may be able to engage better with other communities. Sometimes it should be respected. However, it is generally not the best path. 3, the cases we found a rich variety and positive traditions are not well known. They're only the tip of the iceberg, and much more research and storytelling is needed. 2, there are specific gifts that women with special reference to religiously linked women bring that can and should be highlighted. They include the facility in working across networks and a capacity to escape organizational cultures that block innovation and compassion. And number 1, women in these categories deserve more funding, more training, and more support, and efforts to mobilize all 3 deserve special attention and priority. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And, you know, I just want to highlight this is one of the things that now, with the new website that has been launched by the Carter Center, highlighting this book, each of those 10 points could be in a lively discussion with people, separate blogs, or however, you know, you all would like to set it up. But the linkages that can be done between your work, USIP's work on this, and the Carter Center website give an opportunity for a lot of dynamism on this. And it's a great list. It's a great list. I think Sanam is next. Where are you?
Thank you.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to the points that Jessica made, because the work that we're doing is precisely around this question of how to bring women, civil society, third parties into processes more systematically. The Better Peace tool is about how to do that holistically at all stages of mediation, and we would love to partner with the Carter Center in terms of getting this more normalized and used. We've also been doing consultations around identifying the kinds of criteria that civil society groups themselves would want to apply to the types of groups that they think should be involved in peace processes and selection processes that would enable that. In May, June of this year, we're holding our second Better Peace Symposium, and we have some of the funding, in fact, and so if it's something that you're interested in, it would be great to partner with you to look at specifically issues of selection, identification of civil society and selection processes and models, because the civil society having their own table model doesn't work very well. So we're looking at all of these things, and we would love to have others on board. The second level of, I think, discussions that's really important is that we have a lack of women at top leadership in the UN system. And what would be really great to have is more advocates for joint co-mediation, like Grasa Michel and Kofi Annan, where you have a male and a female envoy going together. At the moment, we've had one female envoy in the whole of the UN history. It was Mary Robinson, and she's not there anymore. We also have a problem of bringing the next generation of women into the system, because many of the leaders, as you can see, sit outside of these systems. So we need a channel of getting the next generation inside, and it would be great to work with you. And then finally, very small actions which have an impact. When we have our meetings with ICANN, we have these bags that we make. We have them made by the mothers of de-radicalized Talib boys in Pakistan, so that they actually benefit from the work that we're doing. And I'm just wondering whether the Carter Center would be interested in having those women make your bags for the next meetings. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, yesterday I noticed that after President Carter spoke, the entire audience up there left. It was the media. There were all these cameramen and photographers sitting up on that side and they all disappeared after you gave your speech. And my question is, would you be willing to say to media that wants to cover your speeches that they can only come if they're willing to sit and listen to everybody else? Because that's really the important thing as well, that you are a gateway to these voices, and they want you, but it would be great that you ask them to stay to listen to everyone else. Thank you very much.
Can I just point out something, because that's great. In his book, if you notice, he asked me, as soon as he decided to write the book, it was a Saturday, was the last day of the forum. I thought, okay, I'm going to sleep in on Sunday. I went and got a massage, and when I came out, there was an email from him He said, I've started working on the book. I want 20 statements from the women and men who participated in the forum, and I'm going to include them in my book. And if you look at the book, there are these, and it wasn't easy getting people to be very concise with what's the problem and the solution, but they're wonderful. Yeah, on a sailboat. Ruth was on a sailboat. It was, but he used his platform exactly in this way, and we try to do that. But that's a great suggestion. I don't know if we can force them to stay, but we'll. Yeah.
I was out on a jog, and I went, oh my goodness, and I jogged back home. One of the things that you said was very important, I think, in the reframing. We've talked a lot about the normalization of violence, but you were talking about the normalization of respect and dignity for women. What is that phenomenology? Could we define the hallmarks of the normalization? Because if we, again, are looking at these dynamisms, this drives violence, normalization, what are the 10 characteristics of societies, of religions, that normalize dignity and respect for women? What are those? What does that look like in a concrete way? And you just suggested that to me as a reverse framing. It was terrific. Thank you.
So Sanam, I would give you the microphone, but I want to move on because we can get over. But think about it, and we'll come back to it. And speaking of which, we have a wonderful activist from Colombia, Clemencia. And so everybody put your headsets on. I'm just going to speak in Spanish, I think. But this is our chance to hear from her.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Damos gracias a Dios, al presidente Carter y a todo su equipo colaborador que hizo posible esta hermosa labor. Labor de juntarnos desde muchos lugares del mundo, de donde hemos venido a contarnos lo que hacemos y lo que padecemos, pero también cuánto valemos. Que Dios proteja a toda esta gente, que los políticos, religiosos y aquellos y aquellas luchadoras y luchadores por el bien nos tenga siempre presentes. Si la injusticia queremos erradicar, a las mujeres en tus acciones debes involucrar. Quería arrancar con esa frase un poco a manera de bueno, nosotros le llamamos versos en Colombia y lo usamos mucho en nuestro medio. Soy Clemencia Carabalí, hago parte de la Asociación Municipal de Mujeres en el norte del departamento del Cauca. Es una organización de mujeres constructoras de paz a partir del conocimiento de nuestros derechos. Es una dinámica que anhelamos la construcción de un proceso amplio en el cual quepan todos nuestros sueños por un futuro mejor. Yo he estado participando y escuchando atentamente durante estos 3 o 4 días de trabajo que hemos realizado todos y todas aquí presentes y quisiera visibilizar en esta conversación el papel que desempeña el modelo económico imperante en el mundo, en la violación de los derechos de nosotras las mujeres. El modelo de desarrollo basado en la acumulación y la extracción irracional de los recursos naturales genera violencia territorial y desarraigo cultural con un impacto muy fuerte en la vida de nosotras las mujeres. Esta práctica, y en particular en América Latina y en Colombia, trae militarización del territorio por grupos legales e ilegales como son las guerrillas, los paramilitares, trae desplazamiento, desapariciones forzadas, amenazas a líderes y lideresas, violaciones sexuales y mayor pobreza a los pobladores y pobladoras nativos o locales. En Colombia, el tema del cultivo de la palma de aceite, la extracción del petróleo y el oro deja muertes todos los días. Y generalmente estas muertes son de personas afrodescendientes, de personas negras. En mi caso en particular, Yo he sido amenazada en 3 ocasiones, he sido desplazada en 2 y perdí un hijo en manos de los paramilitares. Perdón.
Take your time. Everybody here is present to you.
Gracias. La violencia contra la mujer en Colombia ha sido una estrategia para controlar territorios y a las comunidades que lo habitan. Son deshumanizadas, desplazadas, abusadas sexualmente y sometidas a control social. Esto ciertamente para las mujeres indígenas y afrocolombianas es mucho más fuerte, que en Colombia somos las categorías más discriminadas y con mayores oportunidades de acceso. Pero en medio de la peor violencia, las mujeres somos las pioneras en la creación de espacios de paz, en sanar a las víctimas de la violencia e incluso ayudamos a los victimarios a redescubrir su humanidad. En Colombia ha habido un importante avance hacia el reconocimiento de los derechos de la población afrocolombiana, expresado esta en la legislación existente. Sin embargo, en la práctica, la falta de voluntad política para la implementación de dicha legislación, la falta del establecimiento de diálogo franco y sostenido entre el gobierno, los inversionistas nacionales y extranjeros y la población afrocolombiana en este caso, no contribuye al ejercicio de los derechos logrados por los afrocolombianos, palenqueros y raizales en Colombia. Nosotras las mujeres afrocolombianas valoramos los diálogos que adelanta el gobierno con las FARC, la guerrilla de la FARC en Colombia. Pero tenemos claro que la paz es un proceso donde requiere de esfuerzo de todas y todos por recomponer el orden social y partir de los valores y la ética. Nosotras en nuestra región venimos construyendo un proceso de formación con mujeres que le hemos llamado mujeres tejedoras de paz a partir del conocimiento de sus derechos, que lo que hacemos no es otra cosa que formar a las mujeres para que tengamos mejor capacidad de incidencia en el desarrollo de nuestro trabajo, a partir de que conozcamos cuáles son los derechos que como población y como mujer negra hemos conquistado, para avanzar y fortalecer ese trabajo político, trabajo pacífico que sabemos hacer las mujeres. Finalmente, como recomendación, presidente Carter, yo sé de el respeto que inspira usted al presidente Santos y quisiéramos respetuosamente recomendarle que desde el trabajo del centro pudiéramos fortalecer el cabildeo, ¿sí? El cabildeo en Colombia para que, bueno, y en todos los países, yo creo que esto es clave y de hecho quienes me han antecedido en el uso de la palabra lo han mencionado. El cabildeo es clave en todos los países para que haya un mejor diálogo, una mejor concertación entre el gobierno, los inversionistas y las comunidades. En particular, yo le pido que interceda por la comunidad afrodescendiente, presidente Carter, para que las políticas del presidente Santos realmente incluyan el tema de las minorías étnicas en Colombia, que para el caso de los afrodescendientes somos 10,5 millones de los más de 40 millones que habitamos el país. Otro pedido es que considero que debemos acompañar y apoyar procesos locales que luchamos por la reivindicación pacífica de los derechos de las mujeres. El trabajo y empoderamiento local considero que es clave para superar las brechas de desigualdad que generan violencia. A nivel global, a mí me parece muy importante la estrategia de comunicación que las compañeras...
Can you, we're so grateful to you, and so we could hear more people. Okay. Can we finish?
A nivel global, una estrategia, me parece muy importante la estrategia de comunicación que permita avanzar en estos diálogos y en la planeación de acciones conjuntas. Y allí estamos dispuestos a poner al servicio de esta causa toda nuestra capacidad y nuestra experiencia de trabajo comunitario realizado en los últimos 15 años. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Clemencia. We are really appreciative, grateful that you shared this with us, and we will follow up with you. I promise that we will continue the conversation. I'd like to ask Nazila to give us her thoughts.
Thank you very much. Yep, thank you very much. Please accept my thanks, and it's an honor to be here. As Dr. Penda was saying, and a number of other people have been saying in the last few days, women don't just need gender rights in order to become part of the conversation of engaging religion. They also need freedom of religion or belief. So my understanding of what we mean by religion in engaging religion is that it's a body of knowledge that is absolutely crucial to full human development, and that it plugs into human conscience. And so this understanding of engaging religion includes all the bridges to the human conscience. So that includes poetry, music, art, and religious leaders, and direct appeals to people and to their conscience. So religious leaders are part of that bridging to the human conscience and appealing to the human conscience for ending violence, for living, building peace, as was just mentioned, building peace on the basis of values and ethics. But it's also the direct appeals. It's not only religious leaders. And for me, I just wanted to just very briefly say that when we're talking about engaging religion in ending violence and building peaceful societies, let's make sure that freedom of religion or belief for everybody, the right for them to have, to adopt, to change, to drop, and to manifest religion or belief is core to it. Otherwise, all engaging religion will basically be hollow, because women will not have the right to interpret, they will not be given equal recognition as having a human soul that is equal to that of a man, and they will not be able to be in control and arrive at matters of conscience themselves. Thank you.
That's perfect, and we have 8 minutes left, and if everyone I call can stick to 1 minute, I'll get 8 speakers in, because I have a lot of people who want to speak, and I'm going to start with Susie Hayward. So make it quick.
Okay, I'm going to make this quick. One strategy that we've developed at USIP for engaging with religious actors in a strategic way to help advance women's rights has been actually based on a model of how the marriage equality movement, or our assessment of how the marriage equality movement was able to evolve so quickly in the U.S. And that was, one of the concerns is that we engage religious actors in a silo, and we're not really strategically connecting them with other sectors in society that are necessary for social and political change. And that we need to see religious actors as more than just vehicles for nice messages that we like, that are pro-peace or pro-women. And so the strategy that we have links together political activists, legal advocates, and religious actors, so that they're working in tandem to transform social, legal, and political norms simultaneously. And I can share that model with everybody. We're using it now in Libya, Egypt, and Afghanistan, but I think it can extend more widely to talk about both advancing women's rights, but minority rights and other issues as well. So.
Well done. Timothy, can you do it in 1 minute?
I just wanted to tell Catherine Marshall, yesterday she mentioned about human rights, especially gender rights, being called Western. And today she has repeated, so it's deep in her heart. And that we had overcome. But right now, Africa, AU, is not only relegating gender rights into being called Western, but also human rights, and it has made a resolution last month to withdraw from the ICC, International Criminal Justice, in order to protect the people accused in Hague, especially Kenyan president and vice president and marshal and the president of Sudan from being prosecuted. So that is counterbalanced. The reason is this. China has invested more heavily in a short time in Africa than the Western world did for over 100 years. Like in Kenya, they have built a very big superhighway. They are building a railway, a high-gauge railway in Kenya, and they are willing to invest where the Western world is. So material values are counterweighing religious values. Material values are counterweighing human rights values. And I think what we need is to invest more, and I think the Carter Center is doing very well, because I saw him last week being showed in Kenya TV, a documentary on fighting the river fluke in West Africa. And that kind of moral interaction, moral material, and health, I think it does help to change the image of the Western world as imperialist. So China, which is the African incoming empire, and America as the outgoing empire, is tending to have an edge in terms of investment. And I think, I'm not asking the Western to invest more, because Africa has more, is being wooed for material resources. It's not charity. So I would like such kind of moral values as Qatar is investing in West Africa, in zeroing in health, also to zero in maternity health, women maternity cases, because maternity mortality is very high in some communities. There are no hospitals, and I think you should also. I'm not commanding you, but I'm just requesting that you also consider maternity care as part of your moral spearheading of better values. And thank you very much.
Thank you. So we do have a list, a speakers list, and if I don't get to you now, we still have time after the next break, and I will make sure to get everyone in. So let me first call on Manal and then Khadija, and if we can both do it in the next 4 minutes, we'll be good.
Okay. One of the things I just wanted to highlight as a recommendation is to really be careful and challenge our assumptions, particularly with linkages. One of the linkages that we talked about in this conference was the linkage between violence against women and CVE. And I think that there may be some linkages there, but not to isolate them, because there may be other countries that are our allies on violence against women that don't fall, that are our allies on CVE that have really bad violence against women records.
Can you say what CVE is for everyone?
Sorry, countering violent extremism, and the new one is PVE, preventing violent extremism. And so in our conversations, the discussion was an assumption that they're linked. And I think she gave me a time limit, so I know, that's what I'm saying, that's why I rush. So my fear is that when we're looking only through the CVE lens, that the countries who are our allies, and I would say Saudi Arabia, Egypt are some examples, may then not fall into the category of where we need to really be talking. India is another example about violence against women. And if we can tie whatever linkages we have to better data. We're always saying about how strong the link of women and peace and women as peacemakers, but until today, and I've been doing this work for over 18 years, the data beyond very important case studies and anecdotal is still not as strong as it should be. I mean, at the very least, making a commitment to a baseline so that we can have data later, I think would be essential, and maybe putting some pressure on UN Women to take the lead. I would also say that tactically, to get U.S. government attention in Washington, you have to link it to countering violent extremism. There's an obsession with the Islamic State, so I can understand tactically the link, but my fear is our tactics quickly turn into our strategy, and I was very worried about that in conversations. Just to end with kind of Sanam's point about many wonderful points, but one about how patience is overrated. It would be great if we were more firm about the recommendations exist. You know, we know them. We know the recommendation. That's what 1325 is. And every conversation we have, every conference is a way of restating what's in 1325. And I think it's time for it to be very action-oriented, very operational, and to really be able to tease out, rather than talk about recommendations, tease out what is the gap? Why isn't it happening? You know, the data is part of it, but there are other parts, and just 2-3 days, 4 days focusing on how do we make this work? How do we implement it? And finally, I think that in this teasing out is just admitting that there's a difference between women's representatives, which are very important, and women's rights defenders, which we need a better job of bringing men and holding men accountable on.
That's right. And our last speaker before we sum up is Khadija from Tunisia, and Susan has to catch a cab. So one last word.
Thank you very much. I feel a little frustrated because some people have spoken more than 2 times or 3 times, and we've been waiting since yesterday. But anyway, and it's frustrating when you know that you have very little time to say, you know, what you would wish to say. I would like to thank President Carter. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank President Carter for all the work that he's been doing. And President Carter knows many countries in the world and many governments and many heads of governments. And I know that you know Tunisia as well. You were there during the elections that took place. I'd like to remind that when Tunisia became independent, President Bourguiba had women in his program because he believed that there could be no development in a country without the participation of women. Hadn't he taken that decision then, we may have never got it. We got the Code of Personal Status that opened doors to equality. So all these years, until the revolution, we lived, Tunisian people lived with that code of personal status where religion was considered as a personal matter. And people who tried to impose religious practices were severely spied upon and imprisoned and jailed and often tortured. And we knew about that, but we could not do anything because people were afraid. There were some people in the civil society, lawyers and others, who took the defense of those. Now, what happened with the revolution is that Islamists who had been put aside were democratically elected. And when they I want to give you an example. A few days ago in the south of Tunisia, a monument that had been erected for Tahar al-Haddad, who had in 1930 had written a book about women, demanding that women be given education and equal rights. Yes, his statue or this monument was destroyed. Just to show you that women represent what? The danger. Women must not go on or must not be given this. These Islamists, when they arrived, now this is I'm speaking about this because we never had religious people take the lead in Tunisia. When they came and they had the leadership, they claimed that a citizenship that did not relate to the Tunisian citizenship. That is, they did not relate to the Tunisian flag. They brought that black flag that you can see everywhere, in Yemen, in Syria, and everywhere, and they said there are no frontiers, Islam is everywhere. And Islamists ruled. They had the leadership during the few years in Tunisia, and they failed. they were not able to rule. Now, they say they are Democrats, and they are, we don't know. We don't trust them because we have proofs, evident proofs that can be listened to and that are visible. But I just have one recommendation. Maybe I'm jumping from one topic to another. Violence. Where does that violence come from? It comes from different spheres. Violence against women has been present, as you know, across cultures for so long that it often has been seen as natural or inevitable, right? Surveys conducted in some countries find that even women have internalized the idea that any form of domestic violence must be their own fault, and that men are entitled to correct their wives or female kin. Indeed, patriarchal family laws that place women under the supervision or control of male kin or husbands are often associated with cultural norms that enable men to discipline the women in their family. This is one reason feminists in the Middle East and North Africa region have long mobilized for family law reform. In the 1990s, as women's rights groups proliferated in what was an emergent civil society in various countries in the Middle East and North Africa, several researchers identified 4 common grievances and demands: reform of patriarchal family laws and repealing all discriminatory laws, equal nationality rights for women so that those married to foreign men could pass on their nationality to their children.
Khadija, can
Yes.
I ask you?
Yes.
I would like to hear the conclusion of your remarks. I was wondering if because we're late on the break,
Okay.
can I ask you to complete a recommendation, or I could come back to you when we reconvene?
Okay. My recommendation is that going back to the Islamists that were tortured in jails, what happens when they come out of jail? And my recommendation is that governments that ratified international instruments should apply them, should have them implemented, and not authorize torture to be inflicted on prisoners, whatever their crimes. And we had been asking for that before the revolution, but torture is still being practiced in Tunisia, and we are still fighting against that. So this is one measure that should be taken care of. Thank you very much.
So this is a perfect ending because there is much debate going on about how to respond to the current challenge that we're facing with the resurgence of extremism. And some people even justify torture in order to respond to it. And you're reminding us that we cannot accept this because it makes the problem worse. Thank you for ending us on that. We're going to take a quick break, but we will be here at 11 o'clock to have our final session. Thank you very much.